All right, so hey, I'm Steve Caton with Generis, and it's an honor to have my friend Nathan Artt here.
Thank you, Steve.
Good to see you, man.
Yes, sir.
So you and I have been friends for a while, and you've been doing this thing called Ministry Solutions for, I think, most of the time that we've known each other.
Yes, sir.
So tell us a little bit about Ministry Solutions and about Nathan.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in private equity and development, and became a Christian at Buckhead Church about 8 years ago. Started this company about 6 years ago. But we are financial advisors and owners reps, and our role is to create and execute financial and facility strategies for growing churches.
Awesome. And so what motivated you to do that?
Well, you know, it actually happened a little bit by accident.
Yeah.
Just with my background, one of the guys, I didn't know North Point was a big church, but one of the guys at North Point called one day and said, "Hey, we have all these churches around the country making real estate and finance decisions. Would you mind helping?" And what started off as just kind of a pro bono side gig morphed into a business. We've now funded and managed about $600 million worth of church projects and worked with some of the fastest growing churches and large. So God's just really blessed us in the last 6 years.
That's awesome. It's been so much fun to watch you do this journey and just really live in your gifting and your passions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
congrats on
Thank you.
everything that's happening and what God's doing. So you've recently released this new ebook called Intelligent Church Real Estate.
Yes, sir.
Which I enjoyed reading and kind of geeked out on a little bit, having a background in real estate myself.
Yeah.
So tell us what motivated this specific book.
Yeah, so we're very passionate about what we do, but the reason we got very excited, even just to start the company, was we see this moment in a church's history where a thriving, growing church, the culture of that church shifts from reaching people to paying bills, and it almost always boils down to this decision we make about real estate. So we cannot avoid the fact that we are somewhat involved in real estate, whether we're leasing buildings or building buildings. So the better we are at getting into those processes and the more we understand about real estate, the more money we're going to have to do ministry and accelerate our God-inspired vision.
Yeah, I love that. And there's such a, I think a lot of people would say there's a business concept that you're bringing into play here.
Yes, sir.
But it is so much about stewardship.
It is.
And so I look forward to maybe unpacking this a little bit with you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let's do it.
Okay, so Nathan, at the very beginning of the book, you say this statement: people call what we do development. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a no-no world in church, but you know, when we entered into this space, there was not a company. There's architects, there's contractors, there's banks, there's all these different people. But there's 25 different silos of information in a process, and there's no one there who consolidates that process into one cohesive action plan and represents the owner's interest. And this concept is new to church world, but it's what developers do. That's what they get paid for. It's what they do every day.
Yeah.
So all we're doing is we're taking a philosophy, a system, and a concept, and we're coming over and we're applying it to church. And here's the reason. One of our brand promises is to protect the purpose. Pastors did not get into ministry to become project managers. Right.
Yep.
Our ability, if we do a really, really awesome job, it's going to free that pastor up, not only financially, but also to keep focused on the vision of leading his church.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, and you see this all the time in the church world, because we weren't trained formally in these areas, we look for help. And there's usually help in our church. You know, I got a guy, who's done this or that, and the other, and that can be super helpful. But when you're bringing somebody in like you that has the ability to speak in all those disciplines, I think there's a lot more power and leverage there, I would guess.
Yeah, we would hope so. And there's no question, having people in your church who are competent. I mean, most churches we work with have a contractor, architect. Again, it's more about figuring out on the front end, how is this building going to pay for itself so we can continue to accelerate mission?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Instead of figuring out how we're going to fund a building, how do we get buildings that fund ministry?
Right. Well, and so that's a good segue to one of the questions I had, where you said that assets are evaluated based on how they pay for themselves. And so my question is, isn't that sort of how banks look at it too? If a church goes to a bank to get a loan, is that the way the
100%.
bank is looking at it as well?
It is, and here's the thing, you know, banks are going to look at historical numbers. They're going to see, based on the history of your organization, can you afford this project? Developer mindset is a little bit different, because a banker is going to say, how do we fit this project into a box? What we're saying is, how do we build a box, right? So in the development world, before we ever go to a banker, before we ever go into an architect, we've already created a plan. We know how the building gets monetized. We know how the building's going to pay for itself. All we're doing is we're bringing an architect to say, hit this budget, get this much space. We're telling the banker, hey, we've already figured out all the financials. We know how this works. It's the same information a banker looks at. It's just more on the aggressive side. The banker's not going to help you forecast where you're going to be.
Exactly.
That's your job, to make sure that the building, can we afford this today?
Yep.
And are we adding enough capacity to where if this works, the building pays for itself.
Yeah, and I would think that would make the bankers even more comfortable.
Oh, absolutely. What it makes them, Steve, is competitive. You're not begging a bank to give you money. You have multiple options of competing for your business.
I love that. Instead of counting on one person, one bank that you might have a relationship with in your community to step up to the plate for you.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so Nathan, I love this page where you talk about a new perspective on church buildings, and you talk about, how does the building pay for itself? What do we build? And how do we mitigate risk as being kind of three key questions that church leaders have to ask.
Absolutely.
So knowing a lot of church leaders, I know that faith plays a huge role for them, right? And so how many times do they ask you, so Nathan, where does faith enter into this, and how do you answer that?
Yeah, so pretty much every time. And to quote someone that I admire so much, Larry Osborne said, and I'll never forget this, he said that faith is not risk-taking. Faith is obedience. Name one time in the Bible that someone, and look at Peter. Peter didn't step out of the boat and say, hey, catch me. Faith is being obedient even when it's risky. It's not risk-taking. Okay. So the way that C.S. Lewis says it, he says, yes, we are called to the faith of a child, but also to the brain of an adult. And I believe that stewardship is not about raising money, it's about what we do with the resources that we are given. And that's something I think that we'll be accountable for one day.
I love that. So it is that balance of our minds, faith, and then a little bit of the unknown, but trying to mitigate risk by getting our head around the unknown as much as we can, but then still stepping out into a journey of faith. So it plays a role.
Plays a role. Everything that you're about to get into as a pastor, you are going to be required to have a lot of faith. Every church we work with has more needs than they have resources. But it's not about stepping out into that situation blindly. It's about making educated, risky decisions based on the God-inspired vision that you've been given. It's not about building physical kingdoms.
That'll preach.
Hey, let's go.
All right, Nathan, you mentioned here about creating ministry capacity and how you create enough to support the building and the growth.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about ministry capacity, because I think that there's a lot of definitions for that maybe, or we have a lot of perceptions of what that means. What do you mean when you say ministry capacity?
So when we think of creating capacity, it's creating room for growth. So one of the things we say is we are creating capacity to meet an existing demand. Okay. So capacity are adults in seats.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of times, though, that's where a lot of pastors stop, is adults in seats. But one of the concepts we believe in is balance. So for every seat, we need to have enough supporting space for kids, and we have to have enough places for people to park. If you don't, you'll have people who show up for 6 months, it becomes too difficult, and then they quit showing up. So capacity is creating an environment where you're able to grow in a healthy and sustainable way.
Got it. Okay, that helps a lot.
Okay.
So sticking with capacity in that theme a little bit, you talk about how one of the easiest ways to get more seats, capacity, is to use the same seats more.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I know one reaction somebody might have there is, really, I mean, just use them more? That's the best way to go? And I mean, I could see maybe even feeling a little bit of a beat down or a little bit of a burden there. So speak to that a bit.
Yeah, so we work with a lot of multi-site growing church. So just keep in mind my answer is going to be within the framework of a multi-site church. But multi-site requires a broadcast campus. What we refer to is as an equipping campus, which means we are going to fill this up and send people out. So we have 3 tiers of that.
Okay.
So L1 it's a supported campus. We launched this campus. We know it's not going to pay its bills year 1. The goal is to get it to L2 where it's sustaining. It's at least paying its own bills.
Got it.
L3 is the idea that one day it's going to work well enough to where this campus can work towards contributing to the growth of the church through other campuses.
Okay.
So what we say is basically you want to get to a sustaining model in a 2-service model.
Okay.
Right? I want to be able to pay my own bills in 2 services.
Yeah.
But before I can launch that next L1 campus, I need to get to a point where it's doing more than that. It's not just paying its bills. There's enough surplus that can fund future growth. And the way you do that is you add services.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to jump from filling up in 2 services to automatically planning an L1 campus. I don't have the margin for that.
Yeah. How often do you see that happen, though? Where the church thinks, hey, we're filling up 2 services, let's launch another campus.
Yeah, that's usually it, because listen, I'm not unaware of the fact that either A, you're in a movie theater or somewhere that you don't control the hours. That's an exception. Okay. I'm also aware of the fact that volunteer fatigue, especially in temporary facilities, is a very real thing, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of that.
Yeah.
We do see it a lot, but we also see churches who launch way too soon, and now they don't have either campus that's sustaining, and it's just a drag on the church's finances for too long, and they can't accelerate growth.
I get it. So how important is it then to communicate to those volunteers kind of the big picture of what you're trying to accomplish financially so that they can stay engaged and avoid the burnout, right?
Yeah, so going back to what Larry talked about when he said there's vision that we can trust, one of the things I feel that you should constantly communicate are needs and wins.
Yeah.
Right? So we're going to say that when we get to the point of X, then we're going to do Y, and clearly communicate that consistently so people know what is required of them to get from a portable environment into a semi-permanent facility or launching another campus. So always communicate needs and always communicate wins.
So Nathan, you talk in here about how some churches end up getting way down the road before they realize they're in over their heads. And so what happens, what do you see happen a lot of times when a church gets in over their heads, they're trying to correct the situation? What's the biggest mistake that they often make?
Well, I think the biggest mistake that drives those situations is we let our opportunities define our strategies instead of letting our strategies define our opportunities. So here's how that goes. We go to an architect, our friend the banker down the road who's a member of the church says, oh sure, I'll lend you money, and we hire an architect and we dream, and we figure out that what has been designed is $15 million when we can afford $8. Problem is we've really fallen in love with this building, and this is what we've shown the congregation, and this is, so we can't just totally back out. So here's what we do. We say, oh, well, we're gonna phase it, or we're gonna cut scope. And it is equivalent to cutting revenue to save money, right? Like it doesn't work. Because here's what happens is what you phase is the kids area. Now you got a bunch of adults that show up, but they have no safe place for their kids, or they have nowhere to park. They stop coming. So any momentum you ever gain is always capped because of the lack of balance that they have in their facilities.
Yeah, I think in many ways, when I think of a parallel in the business world, it would be like a company that's struggling financially saying, hey, let's lay off the sales team because we can save some money. Those guys travel too much.
That is the perfect analogy. Let's cut off the things that produce revenue so we can save some money.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, but companies do it all the time, so I can imagine churches would make the same mistake.
I think it's an easy mistake to make.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so Nathan, I'm going to put my Generis hat on for a second.
All right.
I loved how you were digging into capacity and looking through the lens of giving units and the amount of money and by giving unit and that sort of thing. So in the Generis world, we often advise churches to ignore what we call the noise that happens in giving under $500 a year. And then we look at that money that's above the $500 line to really assess what's happening. But that feels a little different than how you're assessing it. So talk about that a little bit.
It is. One of the biggest things that we're looking for when we're going to launch a campus is even onboarding. So if we're launching a campus, it's 2019. If I want to understand what a giving unit is represented as far as a number goes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to first time giving units in 2016, and I'm going to see what those people gave in 2017, and then I'm really going to look at 2018. And what that tells me is how a developed giving unit onboards, and it throws out the guys that have been there for 20 years and are fully developed givers. It tells me what I can expect from new giving units over a period of time. There are people who might come in and give $50 in that first year that are giving $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 in year 3. So we don't ignore it, but at the same time, we're looking at it through a slightly different lens.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. You are, again, you're projecting that growth and what's possible in terms of the growth. Oftentimes when we're brought in, it's to assess the current capacity for a campaign. So that's a little bit of a different lens to look through. I think both are important, but it's just, working together, I think you've got a really powerful combination there.
So yeah, Steve, I agree. There's a lot of complementary work with the way that you guys look at it from not just a fundraising standpoint, but one of the reasons that we enjoy working with you is I feel like you guys do a great job of being able to grasp and understand what it means to have sustained giving. Like it's not just raising money for a period of time, it's truly creating a culture of generosity. So one of the reasons we've appreciated working with Generis is that we work well together. What that does for us is it raises the water level in the harbor so that these churches are more equipped to fund the vision that they've been given.
Amen. Thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
All right, Nathan, I love this part in the book where you talk about that there are churches out there that have the ability to drop a 2,000 seat auditorium in the middle of a low density area, and it works out great for them.
Yes, it does.
But as you said here in the ebook, it's like you know who they are, and most of the churches you work with probably don't have that bankroll. and that's true. But let's talk a little bit about just the trend for those kind of churches, even the ones that can do it, is it a wise thing to do now, given the environment and the culture that we're trying to reach?
Yeah, the largest venue that we've built in the last 3 years, and keep in mind, I mean, we've got a pretty good market share of clients that are in the fastest growing and larger churches. Biggest venue we built is 1,700 seats. And what we're seeing is we have clients right now where we're literally doing a 500 to 1,000 seat venue once a year. So again, the idea of a tractional church model years and years ago was, let's build big facilities and take some time to fill them up. And now it's like, let's get into a facility quickly, fill it up so we can launch other campuses. And so what we're seeing is two trends. One is to a smaller room size. That's not just driven by economics, but candidly, not all churches are in low density areas. So how do you do that when you're in Miami or DC or Houston or other areas? And you cannot operate as a church where you require 50,000 to 75,000 square feet to have a building.
Right.
You can't do it.
Yep.
It's either too expensive or there are just none of those locations.
Yeah.
The other thing is we have just seen much higher rates in participation when it comes to giving and serving in smaller venues. People feel more like they're a part of the process and less like they're a result of it.
That's right. I love that. And honestly, this gets to what I think is at the heart of the whole ebook and really the work that you do, Nathan, is it's, okay, we're talking about healthy church real estate, but really all of that is still rolling up to this whole engagement issue.
Yes, it is,
it not?
100%.
I mean, and churches are wrestling mightily with this engagement equation, especially the big churches, the big attractional churches. You got a church of 2,000, 3,000 people, and the problem is, how do we get people engaged when they're only showing up less than twice a month, right? So what you're doing, Nathan, I think is really powerful because, you're helping them to learn how to be healthy financially, but you're also creating a model that is going to help them reach the next generation and keep them engaged, right? Because as you said, people in a smaller venue, they're going to be serving more, they're going to be showing up for groups more often. That's an engaged churchgoer. So I love the connection between what you're talking about in terms of healthy real estate strategy and answering one of the biggest questions that church leaders are wrestling right now with engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think facilities, the key word facilities, same root word as facilitate. The whole purpose of it is to facilitate an experience that we want people to have. And again, the bigger the room, the less people feel engaged in that experience. So you want to know how to get people to come to church more often, have more roles for them to serve in. And that means more campuses. And it's interesting, most of the churches that we worked with in this real estate model, every single one of them had under 35% of their budget going to staffing. Almost every one of them had 40% engagement or more in serving and community groups.
That's amazing.
And the reason is the facility is facilitating a smaller, more intimate experience for people, which increases the level of significance they feel and the engagement they have.
I love that. And I know at Generis, we always preach about how people who serve and people in small groups are going to give a lot more. I mean, we have the data to back it up. I'm sure you're seeing that as well.
Yes, sir. Right? Yeah, more investors and fewer consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's transition to how people can engage with you. So in terms of getting this ebook, if you don't have it already, it's going to be available. You'll see it on the screen here. Beyond downloading this resource, how do people start a conversation with you?
Yeah, so one of our core beliefs is that we believe in investing in relationships before we ask for commitments. So one of the things that we've done since we started this company is we do a free analysis. So sometimes people just want to engage and just say, hey, I'm not there yet, but what do I need to do to get there? Or, hey, we're down the road on this project and we're figuring out that this is a little more complicated. In any situation, we do a free analysis so we can get to know you, we can get to know you, you can get to know us, and it just gives us an opportunity to engage and be informed.
Yeah, I love that. So Nathan, always great to hang with you. Thanks for investing some time with us today.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I hope that this has been valuable for you guys. I know Nathan's work is very valuable to us at Generis. We love partnering with Ministry Solutions.
Likewise.
So if you want to learn more about how to connect with Nathan and the work that he does, hit the URL you see here on the screen. Look up Nathan on social media. He'll be glad to help you. Thanks.